I'll just give a small introduction. Well, the second speaker of the day is General Barali, and I'll just give a small biodata of his. General Barali has done his schooling from Sainik School, Golpara. He joined the NDA in 1973 and was later commissioned in the Artillery Regiment in 1977, and subsequently he earned his wings in 1982. The General has had a brilliant checkered career and has earned a number of laurels. Some of them are the coveted silver gun, the Komodo dagger, and the silver Chetak trophy. He is a qualified flying instructor and a very keen pilot. He has a vision. He has held many appointments, which include: he was the commander of an army aviation flight, a field artillery regiment, and an operational army aviation squadron. He has also held the post of GSO-1 operations, Colonel Adam in J&K, MGO Aviation at Integrated Headquarters. He is also awarded the VCOAS and JOCNC Northern Command Commendation. Today he speaks to us on helicopters, ideal helicopter for high altitude operation. Just prior to his talk, I would like to give you this topic. Actually reminds me of an incident involving a Mi-17 helicopter which had crash landed over the helipad on 6th December 2009. This area was an inhospitable terrain in the glacier at an altitude of 15,786 feet and temperatures ranging between minus 30 to minus 20 degrees. Repair of this helicopter was nearly impossible. The nose oleo had actually pierced through the foreboard and had come into the cargo compartment, and the port oleo had broken. Luckily, the aircrew escaped any injuries. Normally, such helicopters are left there where they are because it is not possible to take any wreckage or any rescue equipment over to repair these helicopters. But we decided to recover this helicopter, and a team of air warriors were trained specially to carry out this repair. On May 2010, this team went across to that site, and finally after the repair, the helicopter was recovered on the 2nd of June 2010. This recovery is probably the only one and unique in aviation history, and this effort was undertaken by an officer, Wing Commander Prakash Angadi, who is very much present here. May I request you to stand up? And for this unique effort of his and leadership and dynamism that he exhibited, he was awarded the Vashisht Seva Medal by the Honorable President of India on the 26th January this year. He has organized a collage of photographs that he had taken at that site for your benefit, and these are available and displayed outside this hall. You can have a look at it when you are going back for your lunch. And now over to General Barali. Thank you.
Thank. Chairman of the technical session of this on helicopters, and ladies and gentlemen. In fact, it gives me immense pleasure to be amongst you today because I am an operator. I operate the helicopter, and I see seated amongst us are designers and the manufacturers of helicopter. Now this topic has been given to me to talk to you on ideal helicopter for high altitude area. So I shall be dealing this topic from an operator's point of view. This took me to this quote by Mahatma Gandhi. I am not a visionary. I claim to be a practical idealist. I shall try to emulate the Mahatmaji as far as trying to become a practical idealist on the subject. Well, when we talk about high altitude, actually if you look at the Wikipedia, it's been defined as those areas which are above 8,000 feet. But otherwise, from the Indian Armed Forces point of view, we define high altitude as those areas which are above 9,000 feet. But to this gathering, and since it has a bearing on global helicopter making, so I think we'll restrict ourselves to 8,000 feet. But the upper limit has not been specified. But since we are talking only about operations of helicopter, we could limit it to somewhere which is globally applicable. Maybe around 18,000 feet. This is a figure which only I have put. Otherwise, it does not exist this way. Although in India, the highest helipad in the world where the helicopter operations are carried out on a routine daily basis are at altitude above 21,000 feet. But I think we can debate on this and see whether we do require generally all helicopters to operate at 21,000 feet or not. So when you talk about making such kind of a helicopter, well, an ideal helicopter for operations at high altitude could be derived from the fine mashing of the airframe with the engine, avionics, and the weapon technology. Along with, if you look at the helicopter, in the center I have put something else, the human elements. Well, how does a helicopter mesh in with a human element? Because you are looking at a machine which is to be operated at high altitude, and it has got certain direct bearings on its operation because the crew has to operate from a cockpit which is unpressurized. Because if you try to make a pressurized cockpit, then you will have to pay such huge weight penalty. Probably you will never come up with such kind of a helicopter. Also, the technicians who have to service this helicopter, they will also be located at high altitude only. As I go by and tell you what high altitude is all about, then you will realize why I am put this human element so supreme in the whole thing. I had the Army Aviation, which has got the highest number of helicopters, or is the largest helicopter operating agency in the country today. We also operate the maximum number of helicopters in high altitude. Army Aviation came into existence in 1986, and we have got the data of past 25 years of operating these helicopters in high altitude, and we have had 64 accidents. When I plot these accidents against altitude, then it's, almost 70% of the accidents have taken place at a place if we put at 8,000 feet and above. While we fly only about 33 to 40% of our flying there. So that means one thing is absolutely sure, that as the altitude increases, the operations there of a helicopter becomes extremely difficult, and that's how so many accidents have taken place in high altitude. Why? Because high altitudes are rugged, underdeveloped, sparsely populated, lacks means of communication, it has got strong winds, variable climate, and then suddenly you find the atmospheric obscurity coming to a place where you have total disorientation. All these things put together makes high altitude flying absolutely difficult for a helicopter pilot. Therefore, whenever we are designing a helicopter, we will not only look at the technical portion of it, also we will look at the human element. I have therefore divided my talk into two parts. Initially, I will share my experiences of high altitude to tell you what exactly is high altitude all about. Then only you will realize why am I looking for a helicopter which should be able to operate in a particular manner there. So therefore, in the phase 2, I will come up to list out what should be the desired features in such a helicopter. Well, I am restraining myself to India most part of my lecture. We have a coastline of over 7,000 kilometers, but more than that, almost twice the size, more than 14,000 kilometers of land borders we have. And out of that, just only about first initial 15 to 20,000, 20% of it comprising of the Gujarat, Rajasthan and the Punjab borders are plains. And the moment you start coming up to J&K, then you come across first the foothills, then the hills goes on rising. As you cross Pir Panjal, then you come across heights which are ranging from 8 to 22,000 feet. As you come near Karakoram ranges, the heights go on increasing. And then you come to those famous twin peaks of Noon and Kon, which are above 23,000 feet. Then you have been hearing about Leh, Ladakh. This is one plateau. This is a high altitude desert where the humidity is absolutely low, but the heights are extreme. The plateau is at 9,800 feet, so and the peaks are even higher. As you keep going eastward and you go to Uttaransel and the Nepal border, then come on across to Sikkim, bordering the roof of the world, the Tibet. There, the heights are once again going right up to 18 to 19,000 feet. But as you go east towards Arunachal, Nagaland, Manipur, etc., once again the heights are more. But here there is a difference, because like in Ladakh, it was a absolutely dry climate. Now, as you keep going east, it becomes more and more wet. So therefore, you have high altitudes which got the tree lines much higher, the perennial snow line much lower, but all the same, these are high altitudes. Now, what are these peculiarities of these high altitudes which affect a helicopter? If you really see, it can broadly categorize into three things. First, the density. That air density is very low. I'll come to it subsequently. Second is the lack of oxygen. Now, how does lack of oxygen affect? We'll see that. And third is, of course, the terrain peculiarities. First, let's see the density. This shows that at 10,000 feet, the air density is 0.7 of what it is at sea level, and at 20,000 feet, it is 0.5 of what it is at sea level. The august audience which is here is well educated on aerodynamics. That famous equation L is equal to CL half rho V square S, where L is the lift and rho is the air density. So if the lift is directly proportional to air density, so you can make out at 20,000 feet how much would be your lift left. That means the entire performance of this helicopter will be totally proportional to the density. Oxygen. Well, you have to fly in this unpressurized cockpit. You can't, whisk it away. Secondly, the technicians have to operate in that altitude, and in such condition, we just heard about how bravely the mission was undertaken to recover that Mi-17. So this is, at high altitude, it's a requirement. So this oxygen plays a major part. So some people may be affected at 8,000 feet, but serious symptoms usually occur only above 12,000 feet. And these symptoms could be very serious, something like high altitude pulmonary edema, high altitude cerebral edema. This just sets in on a person, and within hours it really deteriorates, and unless a person can be evacuated to lower altitude or put into a hyperbaric chamber, you could probably lose him. This is one line which I have picked up from the internet. Somebody was describing the Siachen Glacier. This is where the hell freezes over. A 46-mile river of slow-moving ice surrounded by stupendous stars of snow. Temperatures soon to 50 degrees below, and sudden blizzards can bury entire camps in minutes. Men sleep in caves or igloos and breathe air so spare of oxygen that it sends their heart into a gallop. Fainting spells and pounding headaches are frequent. Frostbite chew its way through digits and limbs, and so many other things. But it is not only typical to the Siachen Glacier. Anywhere in high altitude, you would find this to be true. Therefore, what I am trying to say is that the lack of oxygen makes physical labor extremely arduous. Even for normal day-to-day living, you have to really fight the weather and the climate to be alive out there. Now, how does it affect? It affects the helipad size. Because to make a helipad, first of all, you won't find an even area. Areas are uneven. To make it even, you can't take a dozer out there. You have to do it with the pickaxe and the shovels. And where breeding itself is so difficult, how hard can you drive that pickaxe into the ground to make a helipad? And even if you have been able to make something, how do you cover it with? Most probably you will use something local out there, which at the best can be called as an ad hoc surfacing material to make the helipad. There are helipads where maybe due to the terrain constraint, may be due to the operational constraint, tactical reasons, will be such that it will have a unidirectional approach. You will be very lucky if you have gone into a headwind into the helipad, but just see what is awaiting. When you take off, you are on a tailwind. And helipads could be located in extremely difficult areas, maybe in the confluence of valleys, maybe in a small clearing somewhere outside, or maybe on a ledge. I'll show you some of the photographs subsequently. This is just, location of helipads. Crudely prepared helipads are located in difficult locations like ridgelines, pinnacles, ledges, narrow spaces along slopes, and narrow openings in the forest, confluence of valleys, etc. Very interesting photograph. Look at that helicopter, which just looks like put on top of a pinnacle. You know what has happened? This is called pillaring effect. Normally, during winter, when the snow has fallen, the entire area must have been level. After that, to make this helipad, they have beaten up this snow. And everybody is kept on walking on that. And that snow has become into solid, hard ice. And when the summer set in, the soft snow all around has melted. And this hard ice has stood up there like a huge pillar. Just look to the left. This red thing. Can you imagine what it is? It is the windsock. And can you see this guy? He is that marshaller. He is climbing up there to marshal the helicopter. So this is the kind of a terrain constraint in which this helicopter has to operate. Therefore, the designers and the manufacturers have to keep this in mind as to what kind of a situation that helicopter could be in. And the reverse can happen, in winter, where you have a helipad where the snow is falling, and the people keep on clearing the snow and putting it on the side, and slowly what happens, the sides build up, and over a period of time, the helipad goes into a place like it has gone into a well, with the snow, piling up all around it. The complexities of making an approach or managing an approach on high altitude is extremely difficult. Just look at this helicopter which is on the left. Just behind that, it is just on a ledge. That means on the final approach, as it is, he is in the extreme range of his envelope of operation, and then he is in the extreme range of his power. So at this time he is making an approach, he is just hitting transition, he is trying to stop that helicopter from sinking, and he is still not hit the ground cushion, because the ground cushion will be only ahead in the helipad, and at that time if he sinks further, then all that he will happen is that he will hit that ledge and pile up down below. It's not one or two helipads, there are a number of such helipads which are on the ledges where below you will always find one helicopter lying there. Some pilot has left it there, and maybe with an epitaph written on his grave. Turbulence. Look at this sunnier side of the hill. It's getting heated up. And you know the air is rising, and the side where the sun has not fallen, there it is cool, and the air is trying to descend from there. This causes this updraft and downdraft. So you have to make an helicopter which is really capable of managing through these updrafts and downdrafts when he is extreme range of operation. Low temperatures, low temperatures can be very bad. Like it affects the looms, the avionics bay, the thermocouples, viscosity of oils, lubricants, and adhesive qualities, the basic kindling temperature of the, if you have to start up the engine out there. Then finally, of course, the effect on the air crew and the maintenance crew. But then what is worse is not low temperature at high altitude, but the high temperatures. Because if you have high temperature and high altitude, then you have the rarefied atmosphere becoming even more rarefied, and your lift capability is really at its most critical. Disorientation can set in when the all around is clear and you have snow all around, and you just can't perceive the depth. Finally, when you are coming in for a landing, and just like this helicopter left by one of my friends in the snow, and you just hit the snow, and that's the end of it. Luckily, he still survives. Valley winds. The winds can be really tricky in the valley because firstly they can be very, very strong, up to 40 to 50 knots per hour. And imagine putting down a helicopter there and waiting for your mission to still go through with the rotors running and your uneven helipad with such strong winds there. And you had just come in. You were so lucky you were on a headwind. Now when you want to take off in the same direction, suddenly you find that wind pattern has changed and you are in a tailwind. Sparse population, how does it restrict flying? Because if you think that huge expanse of high altitude, if you can think that you can fly from anywhere to anywhere, yes, physically it is possible. But should you have any problem and you want to put down the helicopter somewhere, or if you crash land anywhere, you may be alive, but nobody may find you, not only for hours, they may not even find you for days. So survival there will become very difficult. So you have to perforce select routes which has got some population, so that in case of some need you can put down the helicopter at a place where you can be rescued. Lack of communication network. So if you want to put fuel anywhere, well, the Bowser has to reach, or some kind of a vehicle has to reach which is carrying the fuel barrels to put it there. So we'll come to this huge problem of refueling, what happens thereafter. Because of that, hot refueling becomes a necessity. That, if somewhere in the high altitude, if you are really trying to refuel, then you cannot switch off the aircraft there, because again, relighting that aircraft will become very difficult because you will cross the tailpipe temperatures. Or else, the oxygen would be so less that the engine just does not catch fire. So, hot refueling becomes a inescapable requirement. Now, look at this helicopter. I am just trying to give you this. That you are located at a base somewhere at around 1,000 feet altitude or something like that, and then suddenly take off and go for a sortie for high altitude at 18,000 feet. In 1.5 hours, you are there at 18,000 feet. And there you have to do so many landings and takeoffs, so you want to switch off the aircraft. Can you really actually switch off? Now, your aircraft was actually set for some kind of a tuning where for startup, it was ideal for at that 1,000 feet. And now you want to switch off at 18,000 feet and without doing anything, you want to again restart that aircraft. Well, technically, there are a lot of problems. So as a designer, you got to look at it. How do you overcome that? And if the bases are located at the high altitude itself, then the problem could be the reverse. Should you come down for anything to low altitude, then how do you deal with the startup switch-offs? Unidirectional approach, I think I talked about it earlier only. The reserve of power must be adequate for operations with minimum specified payload at maximum specified altitudes in tailwinds, or with introduction to what high altitude operations of helicopters are about. Now let's quickly have a look at what the features should be. Of course, to fly an ideal helicopter in high altitude would be a dream for operators like me, but I am very sure for people sitting here, the designers and the manufacturers, this will really turn out to be a nightmare. But looking at the power plant, the power plant must operate from sea level to high altitude in the same sector. I explained why. Many starts up and switch off in high altitude helipads should be required, even though you have started up actually from a low altitude. Eliminate chances of torque split in multi-engine helicopter. We have had, we are operating multi-engines also. We find that this is particularly one place where you got to concentrate. Capabilities wise, what are we looking at this helicopter? Need to balance power output from the power plant, transmission limitations, and the power output from the rotors. Well, you can't have a very capable engine producing lot of power, but if the rotors are not capable of taking that much of power, it is no use. Similarly, if you have a rotor system which is excellent, but if the engine is not producing adequate, then also it is no good. So it has to match both. Payload capability wise, from military point of view, I am just put it like this, that whatever it is, wherever you are operating at the highest altitude, at least be capable of putting down one guy, one soldier. And when we're talking one soldier, if I take a minimum weight of a soldier or average weight to be 70 kg, then he is also carrying 30 kg of his own equipment, starting with his weapon to ammunition and whatever else he is carrying. So at least 100 kg. But ideally, soldiers don't operate alone in high altitude. They would always be all in field areas, and they will always operate in a buddy pair. So actually it should be 200 kg, but I thought if I write it 200 kg, then somebody might just question that, well, probably you are looking at a helicopter beyond the state of the art. So therefore I just left it at 100 kg. The ceiling, what should it be? Like I said, normally we are probably globally 18,000 feet, but in Indian scenario, we must have it at least up to 21,000 feet. Radius of action. Now, because you have no refueling available, you just cannot have refueling available. Therefore, you must have a radius of action where at least 1 hour the aircraft should be able to fly with its normal crew composition of 2 pilots. Control saturation keeps occurring very often because of the low density, the control of low density of air, the controls become extremely sluggish. And you find that you have gone to the extreme limit of the control and the helicopter is still not responding. So this needs to be addressed. This is one huge debate. This can probably go on for days, years, and still not come to conclusion. That in high altitude, should we have a single engine helicopter or a multi-engine? Because if you have single engine, then it can be small and the weight penalties are less. If you have multi-engine, the weight penalties are more. But if you look globally, this is what is the trend is like single versus multi-engine. Almost comparable, 34 to 24, but let's not look at it like this. Let's look at this like this, that if you have one single engine, then it has to be absolutely fail-proof, fail-safe, that it just cannot fail. But if you have a multi-engine, then can it fail? Because in that case, you will have to have a one engine in operative condition where the second engine is capable to do almost same as if it would have been a single engine aircraft. Then why are you paying the weight penalty of having a second engine and then transmission and then complicating the maintenance and so many things more? So this debate can go on whether should you have one single engine which is very fail-safe or you should have a multi-engine. Refueling options, gravity defueling. Why? Because you can put very state-of-the-art something, but you are on a helipad, then suddenly you calculate your fuel for the next mission, then you your weight for the next mission, then you find that you can't land in the next helipad because you are over by about 50 kgs. So at least the easiest thing to do is to defuel 50 kg and go and take on that commitment. So if you want to defuel, if the gravity defueling is there, then you just do it quickly and undertake the mission, otherwise this mission will never go through. Hot refueling we have already talked about, and for that of course inbuilt refueling pumps could be a very good idea, because otherwise you will increase the infrastructural requirement to carry out this refueling. Washable fuel filters looks very minute, but let me tell you, it can be very bad because, whatever it is, at least in our Indian context, we will be looking for, fuel which is mostly put on barrels, and these barrels are going to stay there for at least this decade, and as I see it, it will probably live through the next decade also. So whenever you put fuel in the barrel and stock it there, then always the moisture ingress will be there, this epicoating of the barrel coming off, so there will be some kind of a sediment and all kind of things will be there. So whenever you are refilling from the barrel, then your filter is getting affected. So if it is not a washable filter, then what you will have to do is after every barrel refilling, you will have to throw this filter. That may not be cost effective, and at sometimes you may run out of your filter, and therefore the helicopter will not take off. So such a situation should not arise. High battery capacity, so that at very low temperature also it operates. Just let me share with you that in high altitude, whenever a helicopter is to be parked at night, most of the time the pilot, the last thing that he does is to remove the battery and take it to his room. He would do in a high altitude without his better half, but he cannot do without the battery, because next morning he would require it. The control response, we have talked about it. The requirement of enhanced maneuverability is there, so it has to be built in accordingly. Directional controls, generally we run out of radar, but may not be applicable to all kind of helicopters. But yes, if that be so, it has to be looked into that. We should not run out of radar. Undercarriage. Now we can keep debating, should we have wheels or versus the skids. Ideally, for unprepared helipads and rough helipads, skids are better. But maybe the weight consideration can be such that you cannot have a skid, so you may go in for a wheel. But let it be skid or wheel, irrespective. It must have skis, capability of skis being fitted so that it can land on snow, whether it is wheel or skid, skids. Vibration, anti-vibration system specifically tuned to those weights, CG, altitude and speeds typical to high altitude missions. We talked about oxygen requirement. Well, just imagine if you have an onboard oxygen generator, how much it will help, because sometime otherwise helicopter may be totally serviceable, air crew is fit, but can't undertake the mission because there is no oxygen for him to breathe. Anti-icing system should cover all vulnerable parts, self-explanatory. Roll mission equipment should be slip-on, slip-off design philosophy, because the main problem is only of weight. So if you need to reduce weight, so if you have slip-on, slip-off type, all the things which you don't require, just slip it off. So you would have reduced the weight and would be able to undertake the mission. Cabin and cockpit and cabin. Cockpit heating from the bottom. Because generally what happens, you put, if you don't give it a thought, that air conditioning duct will be always from the top. Just imagine if hot air is coming and hitting your eyes from top, you don't need it. You actually require it from the bottom where your feet is. Otherwise, feet are the first to get frozen and you get chill brain while flying a helicopter. So the heating system should be from the bottom and the feet should get heated up and not coming on the face. And you want to heat up the whole helicopter, you will require some kind of a heating. But if you isolate the cabin where the pilots are, then what will happen, you require lesser amount of heating and he will be quite comfortable. So probably, you can have a cabin design which requires to be segregated from the rest. Cooling system may be optional because you will only require if you are ferrying it out to some planes. Avionics like VOR, ILS, DME, I don't know in mountain where these will be used. At least for military utility, it is absolutely not required. Ground proximity warning system, obstacle avoidance systems, etc. are must. We must have that because that will help us our survivability. CNI, if we have this system, then at least, even if he is landing on a rough or a unprepared helipad, he will know that he is not run out of the cyclic stick while landing it there. Similarly, if he has got an HSI, and just imagine, especially for military utility, in case he is evading an enemy or he is after an enemy who is also maneuvering all around, that at the end of the day he will need to come back to his base. At least an HSI will help him to get back to where he started from. And lastly, talking about maintenance, just imagine that technician is so cold, he's putting on that huge gloves and he can't hold that spanner, because if he holds it without the glove, then his skin will get stuck to that spanner and will be left there only. So he has to put on his spanner. So therefore, we have to ensure that we have helicopters whose all the components, the MTBFs are very high, built-in test facilities there itself to just check on the things, and the periodicity of servicing should be such that only on long intervals it could go back to the base and where the servicing could be done. With this, gentlemen, I come to the end of my presentation. I tried to be a practical idealist in putting forward some points, but what I would like to summarize by saying is that if you're looking for an ideal helicopter in the planes, probably you would be looking more at the state-of-the-art avionics, etc., to be put in that, so that it really becomes a state-of-the-art helicopter. But in high altitude, probably you would be looking more at the engine consideration and the airframe consideration rather than anything else. But be it whatever it is, from the operator point of view, I would only tell one thing to this august crowd, is that please make one helicopter where it is capable of carrying out everything in high altitude what the other helicopters are capable of doing in planes, or it is as safe to fly this helicopter in high altitude as much as the other helicopters are in the planes, so that I as an operator can tell my users that I and my helicopter would be there with you whenever you require. Thank you.
Thank you, General. Along with the ideal helicopter, we'll require an ideal pilot as well. If there are any questions, I think we can take on just one question, please.
Sir, one question I would like to know is, sir, what is the maximum underslung weight, sir, you have ever taken in this kind of terrain, sir?
Actually, once again, the weight configuration. Let's say the helicopter is capable of taking 1000 kgs. If it is such that you need to place it from one place to the other, where the flying time could be just a shuttle of about 5 minutes going and 5 minutes coming, then you will take fuel accordingly. So out of 1000 kg, maybe almost 800, 900 kgs you will be able to lift, because you have reduced everything else. There may be a case where you have even after startup taken out the battery also, just to carry that extra weight there. But otherwise, if the turnaround time is more to wherever you are going, then you may carry just about 200 kgs of underslung load.
Because, sir, up to 250 kg weight underslung, we already have a technology in this Leh area. This is for information.
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you, General.